And with that, all that remains is for me to put the question to the House. So I move that this House would press the red button. And I call up Chris Collins, elected member of Standing Committee, to open the case for the proposition.
Well, thank you so much, Madam President, for calling on me to pull the trigger of this explosive debate tonight in the final term of the Oxford Union's bicentenary year. Before I launch off the case for the proposition, it falls to me to introduce the esteemed individuals who will try and surely fail to convince you to oppose the motion today. Speaking first, you will hear from Sarp Ozdemir, the Union's Director of Media and a third-year student at St Hilda's College. Sarp has the perfect qualifications for somebody who opposes nuclear weapons. He studies physics, and he has luscious locks that would be the envy of any long-haired hippie. Speaking second, Carla Denyer, the co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, and an esteemed member of Bristol City Council. I hope that her party's triumphant electoral success, or lack thereof, will at least offer her this reassurance. She will never have to worry about making a decision on the use of nuclear weapons, nor indeed about making any government decision at all. And speaking last, but by no means least, Kai Bird, the author of American Prometheus, an award-winning biography of the physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the Manhattan Project, which developed the first atomic weapon, and maybe even more importantly, was the inspiration to a blockbuster film this summer, which was rivaled in its commercial success only by Barbie. So let us hope for his sake that his arguments are enough. Madam President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. I will begin, as is usually a good idea at the beginning. The history of nuclear weapons in the West is fundamentally a history of necessity. We developed them in the 1940s, in the midst of the most devastatingly deadly and destructive conflict in the whole history of the world. We developed them in the hope of ending that war, and above all, we developed them because we knew that if we did not, our fascist enemies, some of the most profoundly evil people ever to have lived, would have developed them, and they would certainly have used them against us in the most awful way and without any regard for the consequences of doing so. And today, we continue to possess nuclear weapons, not because we want to, not because we can, but because it remains the case that it is absolutely imperative that we must. We would all love to live in a world where there are no weapons of mass destruction. We would all love to live in a world where there were no war at all. But we have to deal with the world as it is, and not the world as we would love it to be. And the harsh reality is that nuclear weapons do exist. So yes, we must do all we can to ensure that they do not proliferate further, that they are kept out of the hands of the dictators and despots who do not respect international law and would dearly love to do us harm. And yes, reciprocally, it is right that we in the West do our bit to reduce our nuclear stockpiles and certainly not to increase them any further. We must also make sure that the fingers on the red buttons are those of duly elected and democratically accountable leaders within a robust system that upholds the rule of law. But to abandon the nuclear deterrent altogether, at a time when they remain within the grasp of those who do not care particularly for our way of life and would love to do whatever they could to bring it to an end. Perhaps later. See me outside. That would surely be an act of the greatest strategic self-harm. Are we really supposed to believe that disarmament in the West would invite Russia and China just to lay down their weapons, or to deter Iran and North Korea from continuing to pursue them, simply out of the goodness of their hearts? There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that they would do so. Because the sad truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that when they talk about unilateralism, they actually talk about appeasement. And there is no shortage of evidence that appeasement never works. Deterrence, on the other hand, demonstrably does work. No two nuclear-armed countries have ever gone head-to-head in a direct hot war, because the consequences of doing so are just far too great. Let us turn our minds to the terrible atrocities being committed by Russia each and every day in Ukraine. It goes without saying that that war is the fault of Russia, and it is the fault of Russia alone. Yet some experts have argued that the Russian invasion may at least have been less likely had Ukraine not decided unilaterally to relinquish its nuclear weapons only a few short years ago. So I think it is important to remember what this debate is about and what this debate is not. This is not a debate about whether or not it was right for the Americans to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Neither is it a debate about under precisely what circumstances it may be justified for us to use nuclear weapons in future. Indeed, it would be a grave strategic error if we revealed to the world precisely under what circumstances we would consider doing so, because that information would be exploited by our enemies in the very worst possible way. Any action which leads to civilian death is, of course, the most monumental and enormous tragedy. Nobody believes that nuclear weapons should be used as anything other than a very last resort, and every one of us hopes that we will never see them used in our lifetime. But what this debate is fundamentally about is accepting the possibility, at least, that the circumstances do exist in which we may have to take that very final resort and use nuclear weapons. And the reason why we need to accept this is because it is imperative that our deterrent is credible. Our enemies are not going to be fearful of hitting us unless they credibly believe that we would hit them right back. We say that we would use nuclear weapons precisely so that we would never actually have to do so. In his last speech to Parliament as Prime Minister in March 1955, Sir Winston Churchill said of nuclear weapons that we shall, by a process of sublime irony, have reached a stage in this story where safety will be the sturdy child of terror and survival the twin brother of annihilation. And it is for precisely that reason, ladies and gentlemen, that I ask you to support the motion today, because however perverse or paradoxical it may at first seem, it is only in the doctrine of mutually assured destruction that we find our best hope of mutually assured peace. Thank you very much.